Brisbane City Council has approved sweeping housing changes that will allow homes on lots as small as 120 square metres across parts of the city. Separate plans could also bring towers of up to 30 stories to Upper Mount Gravatt, even as Brisbane home values fall for a second consecutive month. Ballymore is set for another major redevelopment as Australia's Rugby Sevens programs relocate to Brisbane to join the Wallaroos. Demolition could begin before the end of the year, but there's still questions around what the project will cost and how much the government will contribute. And the federal government is considering whether to reopen its environmental decision on the Birkdale Whitewater Centre after community groups presented new concerns about groundwater and nearby koala habitat. We'll also look at $38 million earmarked for delivery work on the Brisbane Metro expansion, continuing industrial disruption across trains and ferries, moves to get dumped scooters out of the Brisbane River, improving hospital figures, and a dispute over 100 poker machines in Logan. I'm Adam, and this is the Brisbane Channel, where we go beyond the announcements to examine what they mean and what remains unanswered. This video is sponsored by YB Painting, Brisbane's painting specialists and long-time supporters of the Brisbane Channel. More about them and the exclusive discount available to channel viewers later. But now, let's get updated. Brisbane's housing market has finally started moving in the other direction, although after the growth of recent years, this is still a relatively small reversal. Cotality's Home Value Index shows Brisbane dwelling values fell by 0.6% in July. Revised data also shows a decline in June, making this the second consecutive monthly fall and leaving values 0.7% below their May peak. But anyone hoping Brisbane housing has suddenly become affordable may want to cool their jets. Values remain 14.8% higher than a year ago, with Brisbane's median dwelling value still sitting just above $1.1 million. Unit values have increased by 17.1% over the year, compared with 14.3% for houses. At the same time as the market is cooling, Brisbane City Council has approved some of its biggest residential planning changes in years. Councillors voted 25-1 to overhaul the rules covering low to medium density residential zones, which make up about 14% of the city. From September 18, some lots in these areas will be allowed to shrink from a minimum of 260 square metres to just 120. The new rules will generally support 3-storey buildings, increasing to 4 stories at suitable sites close to frequent public transport or shopping centres. Some low-density properties within walking distance of a shopping centre will also be allowed to subdivide into 300 square metre lots. Council says the changes could create capacity for around 6,000 additional homes by 2032, including more apartments, duplexes, terraces and townhouses. But capacity doesn't guarantee construction. Whether those homes are actually built will still depend on demand, feasibility, infrastructure and individual planning requirements. The changes received broad cross-party support. LNP, Labor and Greens councillors voted in favour, while independent councillor Nicole Johnston cast the sole opposing vote. Labor supported the additional housing but warned that public transport, footpaths, parks and other infrastructure would need to keep up. Johnston argued the changes could increase developers' profits without guaranteeing better or more affordable housing. Council has also approved the final Mount Gravatt Centre precinct plan, after reducing proposed building heights in several areas following community feedback. That included cutting the maximum from 12 to 10 stories in parts of the centre and making further reductions along Tenby Street and near existing lower density homes. But considerably taller buildings are being considered around Upper Mount Gravatt. Consultation has opened on a separate plan centred around Westfield Mount Gravatt, Logan Road and Mount Gravatt Capalaba Road. Buildings between 5 and 30 stories are being considered, with the tallest towers likely to be limited to a relatively small area close to the shopping centre and major bus services. The plan also considers new pedestrian connections, arcades and shaded boulevards. Unlike the wider low to medium density changes and the final Mount Gravatt plan, the Upper Mount Gravatt proposal has not yet been adopted. And to put the new 120 square metre minimum into perspective, a 185 square metre block used largely as a driveway was offered at auction in Petrie Terrace this weekend. That property is still 65 square metres larger than the smallest lots contemplated under the new rules. Not every 120 square metre site will be suitable for a standalone house, but it provides a useful visual indication of just how compact some of Brisbane's future housing could become. Before we move on, if you find these updates useful and want to support independent coverage of Greater Brisbane, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or buying me a coffee through the link below or here. You can also become a channel member by clicking the join button, which allows you to be a part of the channel's growth, and you can also get access to extra benefits. Every bit of support helps me spend more time investigating these stories, attending media events, and putting questions directly to the people making the decisions. Ballymore is set for another major redevelopment, just 3 years after the $31.5 million National Rugby Training Centre and rebuilt McLean Stand opened on the western side of the ground. This time, the condemned eastern stand will be replaced by a new 2,400-seat grandstand integrated with additional high-performance facilities. 4X Hill will remain, with Ballymore's overall capacity sitting at around 8,000. The deal will also see Australia's men's and women's rugby sevens programs move from Sydney to Brisbane, joining the Wallaroos at Ballymore. The Wallaroos were already based there, so it's primarily the sevens programs that are relocating. The government says the agreement will bring up to 90 Rugby Australia athletes and staff to Queensland, while Ballymore will also provide a base for the Wallabies when they're in the state. The broader deal includes Anzac Cup Bledisloe Cup matches at Suncorp Stadium in 2027, 2029 and 2031. Queensland Rugby expects demolition of the eastern stand to begin before the end of the year, with construction taking around 2 years. The sevens athletes are expected to move in after the 2028 Los Angeles Games, ahead of the Women's Rugby World Cup in 2029. What we don't know yet is how much the redevelopment will cost. The project will be funded through the Games Legacy Fund, but the government has not disclosed the expected cost or how much of the fund will be committed. A department media advisor confirmed to the Brisbane Channel that those details won't be released at this stage. The Premier says revealing the price before procurement could undermine competitive bidding. That explanation may help protect the tender process, but it also means the public cannot yet access the scale or value of the commitment. And certainty being offered to rugby contrasts with the much less certain future facing football, or soccer as many still call it. Logan City Council has rejected the Football Queensland's proposed $76 million redevelopment of Meadowbrook Park, including its request for longer leases and additional council land. Council raised concerns about funding, long-term control of the site, and whether local clubs would receive sufficient access. Football Queensland hasn't been immediately evicted, and its existing leases remain in place, but they have only around 3 years left, and Council has ordered a review of the current arrangements. Meanwhile, Brisbane Roar will be squeezed out of Suncorp Stadium for much of the coming A-League season, while there is still no firm commitment to upgrade Ferry Park into a permanent home. Sports Minister Tim Manders says discussions are continuing, but he wouldn't commit to Ferry Park, around 15 months after saying an announcement was expected in the near future. For rugby, there is now funding, a construction window, and national teams preparing to move in. Football is still waiting for something similarly concrete. A federal environmental decision on the Birkdale Community Precinct and Redland Whitewater Centre is back under scrutiny, but it hasn't been overturned. On May 28, the Federal Environment Department decided the project would not require a full assessment under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, provided it followed specified environmental conditions. These conditions include protecting around 40 hectares of conservation and avoidance areas, along with measures covering vegetation clearing and koala movement. An alliance of environmental and community groups has now asked the minister to reconsider that decision. The Community Alliance for Responsible Planning lodged the request on behalf of groups including Redlands 2030, the Birkdale Progress Association, and Koala Action Group Queensland. It says new scientific information indicates vegetation beside the proposed Whitewater Centre draws water from a shallow water table connecting the development area with koala habitat inside the conservation zone. The groups are concerned that construction could change groundwater levels and affect that habitat. Those claims have not been accepted as findings at this point. The federal department is now seeking public feedback on whether the information is sufficiently new and substantial to justify reopening the original decision. Comments can be lodged through the EPBC Act public portal until August 27 under reference 2026/10471. Redland City Council rejects the suggestion that the project poses an unacceptable groundwater risk. In a response to the Brisbane Channel, Council said the independent groundwater assessment commissioned in 2025 found the project would have no adverse effect on groundwater and therefore no corresponding groundwater-related impact on federally protected environmental matters at the site, nearby or in Moreton Bay. Council says the whitewater channels and basins will be fully lined, preventing water inside the facility from interacting with the surrounding groundwater. It also pointed to more than 7 years of environmental monitoring and plans to retain and enhance more than 60% of the site for conservation. Council remains confident that evidence supports the original federal decision. Questions about delivering the Whitewater Centre were redirected to the Games Independent Infrastructure and Coordination Authority because the venue is now being delivered by the state and federal governments through GICA. The Brisbane Channel also sought information from the Federal Environment Department, but no response had been received by the time of recording this video. The immediate question is whether the Community Alliance has presented enough new information to reopen the decision. If not, the existing conditions can remain in place. If it has, the Minister could revoke and replace the decision, potentially requiring a more detailed federal environmental assessment. Brisbane Metro bus lines have recorded strong growth in evening and weekend use, but the figures come with some important context. Council says patronage across Brisbane Metro and the redesigned bus network has increased by 27% over 2 years. Between 7 p.m. and midnight on Fridays and Saturdays, the M1 carried almost 155,000 passengers, around 63% more than the routes it replaced. The M2 recorded an even larger increase, rising by 161% to almost 165,000 evening trips. Council says this shows more people are using public transport to visit restaurants, for shopping, events and entertainment, not just the weekday commute. But the comparison doesn't isolate the effects of the metro vehicles themselves. The new network provides considerably more services, including another 23 M1 and 58 M2 services on Friday and Saturday evenings. The latest figures also benefit from 50-cent fares, so the growth reflects a combination of cheaper fares, increased frequency, extended operating hours, the redesigned network and the metro itself. The proposed expansion towards the Brisbane Airport, Castledine, Capalaba and Springwood is also taking another step forward. A $36 million business case is being funded equally by Brisbane City Council and the state and federal governments, with each contributing $12 million. The federal government originally committed $50 million, leaving $38 million after its contribution to the business case. At last Tuesday's media conference, I asked Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner whether the federal government had formally agreed to put that remaining money towards early delivery work.
Yeah, so the business case is expected to be completed by August next year, so within 12 months that process will be completed. We'll be keeping the other levels of government up to date all the way through about the progress of that. But the great news is we've got it in writing from the federal government that they'll put the $12 million as their contribution towards the business case, and then the remaining component of their contribution of $50 million at this stage will go into actual delivery works. And so that is in writing. We're really grateful for their support here.
According to the Lord Mayor, that gives Council a written commitment for the remaining $38 million to be used on delivery. But it doesn't yet tell us what those works will involve, which extension they'll support, or when they will begin. The overall cost will also be considerably more than $38 million, and Council has acknowledged that full expansion will require further state and federal funding. The business case is due in August next year and will identify which routes will be prioritised along the short, medium and longer term. Until then, we won't know how much of the proposed network can realistically be operating before 2032. While Metro patronage is growing, Brisbane's trains and ferries are still being affected by industrial disputes. Queensland Rail has restored 135 weekly services, including another 80 peak period trains returned this week. But weekday services are still operating on a reduced timetable, similar to a Saturday schedule, with some 3-car trains remaining in use. Queensland Rail has now reached an in-principle agreement with unions representing around 270 train controllers. The proposed deal includes an 8.5% pay increase over 3 years, along with protections covering safety assessments and workplace changes. But negotiations are continuing for network, rolling stock and electrical workers. The Australian Manufacturing Workers Union is also maintaining rolling stoppages and an overtime ban. Queensland Rail says that's delaying work on its rolling stock maintenance backlog, so the train controller agreement won't immediately result in more services returning. There's still no date for the full timetable to resume. Brisbane's ferry passengers are also facing further disruption. After several previous shutdowns, no Brisbane River ferry services are scheduled to run between midday and 4 p.m. on Monday. Further stoppages are planned for Wednesday from 7 to 9 a.m. and again from 3 to 5 p.m. The dispute between River City Ferries and members of the Maritime Union has continued since negotiations over a new enterprise agreement began last October. The union says 95% of its members rejected the company's previous offer, raising concerns about wages, fatigue, and work-life balance. River City Ferries has previously said it was disappointed that passengers' journeys were being disrupted while negotiations continued. Brisbane Labor has called on Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner to intervene, arguing that council awarded the operating contract and ratepayers ultimately fund the service. The Brisbane Channel previously sent questions to both River City Ferries and the Maritime Union. Neither responded, so we still don't know how far apart they remain or what may be needed to end the dispute. For now, passengers should continue checking service updates before travelling. And Brisbane ferries aren't the only reason the river's been making news this week. Unusually low tides recently exposed dozens of rental e-scooters sitting in the mud between the Story Bridge and QUT's Gardens Point campus. Ocean Crusaders, which cleans waterways across southeast Queensland, says it's removed around 150 scooters from the water near Brisbane CBD over the past year. Experts warn that chemicals from deteriorating lithium-ion batteries could leach into the sediment and affect organisms living at the bottom of the river. Council says Lime and Neuron are responsible for retrieving their devices, but the people who normally collect and recharge scooters aren't necessarily equipped to pull them out of a tidal waterway. At last Tuesday's media conference, Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner said Council had asked the operators to work with Ocean Crusaders and contribute to the cleanup.
And those operators have indicated that they're willing to work with Ocean Crusaders and develop a partnership and provide some funding to do that.
But at the time those comments were made, Ocean Crusaders founder Ian Thompson said neither company had contacted him. He estimates a weekly cleanup crew and boat would cost around $120,000 a year. So there is an intention to form a partnership, but no public detail yet on how much operators will contribute, how often the cleanups will occur, or when the arrangement will begin. Thompson has also suggested installing barriers at dumping hotspots. Schrinner said council would consider it, but argued fencing might not stop people throwing scooters into the river and could restrict public access to the waterfront. Police are separately investigating an incident in June when a group allegedly threw 16 scooters into the river near the Star Casino in a single night. And scooters aren't the only devices causing trouble in and around the river. Brisbane Water Police have charged 6 people with 23 offences following a crackdown on dangerous and antisocial jet ski riding. The operation ran from July 25 to August 9 under the name Yankee Rooster. I really think they should consider hiring someone new to come up with their operation names. Yankee Rooster? Really? Anyway, police intercepted 86 jet skis and issued 10 infringement notices using patrol boats, drones, and CCTV. They allege some riders deliberately sprayed ferry and charter boat passengers, people waiting at terminals, and pedestrians beside the river. A 20-year-old Park Ridge man faces common assault, serious assault, and public nuisance charges after allegedly spraying people on several boats. Police are also investigating an incident in which a couple and their 4-month-old baby were allegedly sprayed at a ferry terminal. Water police warned that deliberately spraying members of the public with a high-powered jet ski isn't harmless fun and can be considered criminal assault. Queensland's latest hospital figures are finally heading in the right direction, but there's still plenty of room for improvement. Ambulance ramping across the state's 26 largest hospitals fell to 35.5% in the June quarter. That's down from 44.8% a year earlier, and it's the lowest statewide result since December 2020. Ramping means care hasn't been transferred from paramedics to emergency department staff within 30 minutes. So even with the improvement, more than 1 in 3 patients were still waiting beyond that target. The government wants to reduce that figure to 30% by 2028. The result came despite almost 200,000 people presenting to emergency departments in June, around 4,400 more than in the same month last year. Some Greater Brisbane hospitals recorded their biggest quarterly improvements since 2020, including Queensland Children's Hospital and Redcliffe Hospital. Redland Hospital improved from 65.5% to 56.2%. That is a substantial reduction, but it still means the transfer of care took longer than 30 minutes for more than half of ambulance arrivals. The government hopes a new $8.3 million transit care hub at Redland Hospital will help bring that down further. The hub moves patients who no longer need an emergency or ward bed into a separate area while they wait for medication, transport, or discharge arrangements. That frees up beds for people arriving through the emergency department. The Redland facility has expanded from 12 treatment spaces to 19 and will now operate around the clock with capacity for more than 7,000 patients a year. The government also announced this week that they'll invest $93.1 million over 4 years to place 53 specialist mental health nurses in emergency departments. Redland, Redcliffe and Hervey Bay are the first hospitals recruiting, with Caboolture and a few regional hospitals to follow. The nurses will assess people arriving in mental health crisis earlier, help de-escalate distress and connect them with appropriate treatment pathways. Queensland's elective surgery waiting list has also fallen by around 1,500 patients over the past year, leaving 58,912 people waiting on July the 1st. That total doesn't tell us how long individual patients have waited, and one improved quarter doesn't guarantee lower ramping rate will continue, but the figures do show genuine improvement despite growing demand, even if the problem remains a long way from being solved. A quick shout out to channel sponsor YB Painting. If you're planning on updating your home or workspace, I highly recommend you get in touch with YB. The multi-award winning team offer fixed pricing and a 5-year warranty on their work, so you know exactly what you're getting up front. You can claim your exclusive 10% discount by scanning the QR code on screen or through the link in the description. An NRL club based more than 1,000 kilometres away wants to open a $22 million leagues club in Logan, and its proposed 100 poker machines are causing quite the conflict. The North Queensland Cowboys want to establish the venue as part of an expansion of Homeview Central Shopping Centre. It would include a 400-seat restaurant, cafe, children's playground, merchandise shop and spaces for community groups. Logan City Council has already approved the broader development, but Mayor John Raven says Council didn't know the Cowboys planned to apply for 100 gaming machines. Raven says the 2022 development application could include a gaming lounge without specifying how many machines were proposed. He says Council only learned the number when the Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulation sought its input on the separate gaming application. He points out that every existing pub within 5 kilometres has fewer than half that number of machines, and approving another 100 would almost double the number of pokies per person in the local area. The Cowboys currently have 59 club members living in Logan, although the club says it has thousands of members and supporters across southeast Queensland. Raven has labelled the proposal a pokey palace and says the Cowboys' own community impact statement projects more than $13 million in annual gambling losses at the venue. That would be in a city where residents lost almost $300 million through poker machines last year. The Cowboys have proposed returning $100,000 to Logan community in the first year, followed by another $1.5 million across the next 4 years. Raven described that 5-year contribution as inadequate compared with the projected gambling harm and the support provided by other clubs operating gaming venues in Logan. The Cowboys say the proposal remains in its early stages. Chief Executive Tim Follett said it could create local jobs, support grassroots sport and charities, and provide a gathering place for the club's Southeast Queensland supporters. He said the club would follow the required planning, regulatory and consultation processes and had contacted the Mayor's office to begin discussions. Council can object to the gaming application, but it doesn't make the final decision. That rests with Queensland's Liquor and Gaming Commissioner through the OLGR. The Commissioner can approve the application, refuse it, or approve a lower number of machines. The Brisbane Channel contacted the office for more information about the application and assessment process, but no response had been received by the time this video was prepared. Raven is encouraging residents to take part in the consultation and says he wants either substantially fewer machines or a considerably larger return to the Logan community. So while the Cowboys have approval for the league's club development, they don't yet have approval for the 100 poker machines at the centre of the dispute. Still in Logan, plans are moving ahead for more housing on a state-owned site beside Logan Hospital and Griffith University at Meadowbrook. The property has been placed in a fast-tracked development area managed by Economic Development Queensland, with buildings between 2 and 8 stories contemplated. But the state hasn't disclosed how many homes are ultimately expected. St George Community Housing already lists a project at the same address involving 80 apartments, 42 social and 38 affordable, but it isn't clear whether this is the complete proposal or one part of a larger development. There are also questions about the supporting infrastructure. Local concerns include road capacity and pedestrian safety around University Drive, particularly near the motorway entrance. Logan City Council says any new infrastructure should meet its standards and that the development charges collected should be returned to the council in full. If that happens, council says Logan ratepayers shouldn't face an additional cost. But there's still no public estimate of the required work or confirmation of who would cover any shortfall. I asked EDQ about the number and mix of homes, the infrastructure needed, and how it would be funded. EDQ said it was preparing a response and asked for more time. I agreed and deferred the story, but no answers arrived by either the extension or a further deadline the following week. Meadowbrook makes sense as a location for more housing, but the scale of the project and who pays to support it remains unclear. Last week's lead story was Moreton Bay Council's plan for a designated camping area for people experiencing homelessness at Wyllie Park. Since then, 7 News has reported that a camp at Kippa-Ring was vandalised with tents pulled down, belongings scattered and solar panels smashed. One woman's possessions were also allegedly doused in petrol. Homelessness service Nourish Street says this wasn't an isolated incident, with people at other camps reporting abuse and objects being thrown at their tents. The incident didn't occur at Wyllie Park, but it highlights the safety concerns council will need to manage there. Council has now provided the Brisbane Channel with more detail about how the trial is expected to operate at Wyllie Park. It says the park will provide people experiencing homelessness with a voluntary, no-cost camping option, but despite earlier reports of 60 sites, council says the final capacity is still being determined. Camping will be limited to tents, with the registration process and lengths of stay assessed case by case. Rules will prohibit unreasonable noise, nuisance, and open fires, while vehicles will have to remain in designated parking areas. The park already has public amenities, picnic shelters, barbecues, pathways, and grassed recreation areas. Council says regular outreach will continue through local support organisations, although it didn't specifically confirm whether showers, power, storage, or dedicated drinking water facilities will be provided. Council also didn't directly answer whether people experiencing homelessness will receive priority if the site fills up, whether they'll be offered a place before compliance action elsewhere, or what free option will exist for people sleeping in vehicles or those for whom Wyllie Park is unsuitable. It says people camping elsewhere will be given information about Wyllie Park, caravan parks and showgrounds. The establishment and operating costs also remain unknown. Council expects additional servicing costs, but believes they may be offset because it will no longer need to service and maintain some other parks and public areas to the same extent. Encircle Community Services supports the trial, saying it could give people stability close to support services without fearing they'll be moved on. Housing Minister Sam O'Connor says the trial isn't best practice and isn't supported by the state government, while council stresses that it won't replace crisis accommodation or emergency housing. The Kippa-Ring incident makes the case for a safer option especially clear, but important questions about Wyllie Park's capacity, facilities and access rules are still unresolved. And Brisbane's most famous blue healer is getting a new look for the big screen. The first teaser for the Bluey movie shows Bluey and Bingo in a computer-generated animation style, a noticeable change from the television series that has already divided fans. The film remains firmly connected to Brisbane, with Ludo Studio producing it in collaboration with BBC Studios and creator Joe Broom? I don't know, sorry Joe, writing and directing. The Bluey movie is due in cinemas on August 6 next year. On my radar this week are two separate youth justice proposals that need closer examination. The first is the government's circuit breaker program, which would allow courts to send eligible young offenders to a supervised residential program for 3 to 6 months. The government presents it as a rehabilitative intervention before detention, while critics have questioned its evidence base, compared it with earlier boot camps, and raised concerns about children's rights and its likely effect on First Nations young people. A parliamentary committee has recommended that the bill be passed. Separately, the government is developing a new offence for serious repeat offenders who commit another serious crime while on bail. It would carry a mandatory sentence, but the government is still deciding exactly who and which offences it would cover and how long that sentence would be. I've sent questions about both proposals to the Youth Justice Minister's office and will return to them once the answers and the legislation provide a clearer picture. Also on my radar is the coronial inquest into the deaths of 3 mental health patients at the Prince Charles Hospital. Evidence reported so far has raised questions about overcrowding, staff workloads and patient monitoring, but evidence presented during an inquest shouldn't be treated as a final finding. The hearings are scheduled to continue until August 28, so I plan to cover the case properly once they've concluded and the evidence can be considered together. Here's last week's video, and I'll be publishing the podcast about Brisbane's nightlife and what it could become this week. Once that's out, it will appear here. Congrats on making it to the end. We're done.